Okay, welcome everyone. This is the 1619 presentation for November of 2024, and we have a special guest speaker today by the name of Lynn Hudson, who is going to talk to us about West of Jim Crow, which is basically talking about the issues with Jim Crow and other kinds of racial experiences in California, and I think specifically in Southern California. But I'm not going to go on any longer. In the blog post, you learned something about Lynn, and you can go find out more there. I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, and Lynn, you're ready to go whenever you can, whatever you want to start. So it's all yours.
Great. So everybody can hear me, right?
Yes.
And you're not hearing an echo.
No.
Okay, good.
There's a little bit of room reverberation. If you could get closer to the microphone, it might help.
Okay. Yeah, you know what? Maybe I'll do this. This might be better. Okay. So let's do this. Okay. Any better?
It's still, there's still some reverberation, but go ahead, let's try it and see how it works.
This might be because
That's sounding better there. Whatever you're doing now is better, I think.
Okay. I think I've got two Zoom windows open, so I'm hearing an echo, but I don't know how to close it. So anyway, thanks for coming. And I'm going to talk to you today about a section of this book I wrote called West of Jim Crow. What I tried to do in this book was to give a sense of the depth and the breadth of white supremacy in the state of California. So I examined places where Jim Crow operated, and I looked at how it worked, when it worked, and I was trying to underscore the complexity of anti-Black sentiment, both legal and extra legal, outside the law. And I was looking at different places in the state. Part of what I was trying to argue is that unlike a sort of popular myth, California was not free of Jim Crow. It was also not late to that party, so to speak. It did not, for example, just wait and copy the South. That the state invented forms of Jim Crow and practiced them with great skill, actually. Now, I couldn't look at the whole state, right? And this book does not pretend to be a study of every kind of segregation in the state. It doesn't, for example, have anything about San Diego or, have a lot about Petaluma or, it picked 6 stories that I thought showed, again, the kind of depth of Jim Crow. So what I'm going to do today is focus on the chapter 5, which is about how African Americans and their allies fought back against racially restrictive covenants or segregated housing and segregated neighborhoods, and also how the role of the Ku Klux Klan. It's a story that involves some well-known figures, figures that you might have heard of, African Americans who are pretty well known. For example, Charlotta Bass, who was a publisher and editor of the California Eagle. The California Eagle, for those of you who don't know, is one of the longest running Black newspapers in the country. It was read not just by Black Angelenos, but by African Americans all over the country, and especially in the West. She was a fierce political organizer. She ran for office. She often identified as a socialist. She was the first Black woman to run for vice president in 1952 under the Progressive Party. And it was Charlotta Bass who sounded the alarm about the arrival of the Ku Klux Klan in California in the 1920s. And she became one of their most formidable opponents. Okay, now, when we think about the history of the KKK, we usually think first about the South. And this is a very famous cartoon. I don't know, can you guys see that?
Yes,
The-
it's clear.
Okay, that was printed in Harper's Weekly, which is sort of the life magazine of the day of the 19th century and early 20th. And it depicts the Klan that most people know about. This is the Klan that originates in Reconstruction, right after slavery's ended, right? And most people, you might know that it was founded, you might have heard it was founded in Georgia at Stone Mountain. Their main goal here is to basically stop freedom, right? They go after African Americans who are newly freed, especially African Americans who are exercising their new right to vote. But they also terrorize Black families who are trying to make a living. You can see here in the cartoon, it says schoolhouse, right? As if they've let
All from.
they've lit it on fire is what I'm trying to say, right? So, and you can see the words worse than slavery. So over here, it says the White League. It's important to acknowledge that white supremacy existed in many forms. And the hooded, the Klan members are maybe the extreme version that we are most familiar with. But there were all kinds of associations and groups and clubs like the White League. In the 50s, after Brown versus Board is passed, they'll call themselves the White Citizens Councils. So I always tell my students, you may know about the Klan, but that doesn't mean that's the only place white supremacy lives. Now, in the 1920s, the Klan reinvigorates. So this picture depicts what we call the first Klan. But in the 1920s, it's kind of reborn, and we call that the second Klan. And the second Klan, unlike this Klan that's associated with the South, the second Klan is very active in the West and the Midwest. So here's a picture of the Klan marching down Main Street, Olive Street, in downtown LA. It's right about 2 years after they'd first arrived in Los Angeles. Charlotta Bass sounds the alarm in the pages of the California Eagle. Actually, it's in 1921. Sorry, this is about 3 years later. She runs a huge headline that says, "Shall we entertain the Klan?" And then she informs her readers that they've arrived in LA, they've set up offices downtown. And she also runs another article in the Eagle that's titled, "What Shall We Do About It?" Now, the Black press, especially the California Eagle, was vital to African Americans around Southern California. It kept them informed about who the Klan was and what they were doing. So by 1922, 23, and then in this picture, 24, the Klan is building in Southern California. They are active in Riverside, they are active in downtown, but they're also spreading across the state and up the West Coast. So we have active chapters in Oregon, in Portland, in state of Washington, and all across California. So they really come to the attention of the Attorney General and the politicians in the state after members of the Inglewood KKK attempt to kidnap a Mexican couple. They accuse them of bootlegging. And this is a good point to remind everybody that the Klan don't only focus on Black citizens, they are also anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. So they are anti-women's rights. So they kidnapped these Mexican couple, and there's an incident where there's a shooting, And so members of the Klan get arrested in LA. Let me see, what's this picture here? So here are members of the Klan going to the funeral for one of the members that was shot at that. It was sort of a shootout in 1922. So after this happened, the LA County DA was instructed to investigate. And what the DA's office did was they raided the downtown office. And when they did, they found lists of members, card-carrying, dues-paying members of the Klan, hundreds and hundreds of names. And it was quite revealing for the state because a lot of the names that were on the list were in law enforcement. In fact, there were over 1,000 members in the city of LA and over 3,000 members in LA County, their names on that list. And there were 3 names of men who were in the DA's staff. Now, 2 names on the list spoke volumes to Charlotta Bass and those who were fighting white supremacy. The LA Chief of Police and the LA County Sheriff were both members of the Klan. So this is the 1920s. As the Black magazine, The Messenger, put it, this is a quote, "No sane, courageous thinker would contend that Negroes can afford to rely on the police and the authorities when the evidence reveals that the police and the authorities are members of the Ku Klux Klan," end quote. Again, this may not be surprising to us in this day and age, in this week, because we know that the LAPD and the county sheriffs have been enforcing white supremacy since they were formed. But this was kind of evidence that was pretty shocking to some at the time. Now, one would think that that would have put the end to the California Klan, but after a botched trial in which all of the Inglewood Klan were acquitted for the attack on the Mexican couple, the local NAACP wrote to the national office and said, quote, "The Klan continued to operate in the open ever since." So there's very little repercussions of this. Now, what does this have to do with racial restrictions and African Americans? Contrary to popular assumptions, the Klan did not disappear with World War II and Hitler's master race ideology. This you can see is a protest against segregated housing. It's undated, but we can guess from this that it's probably in the 50s. In fact, World War II revitalized the California Klan, and we might call this the third Klan. Their new targets? Black and brown families who are moving into white-only areas of the state. They particularly targeted war veterans. Now, you know, I live in Chicago, and we talk a lot here about the attack on the World War I soldiers and vets who came back to the city and were the object of a lot of terror, subject, I should say, in the summer of 1919, called Red Summer, for the riots that happened, which were mostly white on black violence. And this is a similar sort of thing, that there's a particular kind of rage that's aimed at Black vets who are returning for World War II and claiming their rights to own a home, to vote. They were heroes in France, and they are asking, why can't we sit at a lunch counter? Why can't we get a bank loan? Why can't we take advantage of the federal home loans? So it's important to say that the Klan aren't the only group who are protesting integrated facilities. Californians up and down the state dedicate themselves to keeping neighborhoods, schools, and institutions of all types from being integrated by non-whites. Pools and beaches were segregated up and down the state. Real estate associations and homeowners associations led the way to restrict housing to whites. Now, I don't need to tell you all probably that they were extraordinarily successful, these homeowners associations, because you live in Pasadena. And a quick drive to the Huntington Library will remind you that one of the pioneers of housing restrictions and creating white-only neighborhoods was Henry Huntington himself. He created those neighborhoods around Oak Knoll, and you are probably familiar with the white-only restrictions in beach communities like Huntington Beach and Hermosa Beach, right? All through the valleys, into the foothills, all the way to the beach, right? Restrictive covenants were used with great success. And just a reminder that that's the part of the deed, right? When you buy or rent a house, it would say, and I agree that I will never sell this house or rent this house to, and then it would have a list. And depending on what community and what year, the list might say to, if it's 1945, let's say, to a Negro, to an Oriental, it might say to a Jewish person, it might say Hawaiian. California was really in the forefront of using these restrictions, housing restrictions. Of course, Chicago and New York, they were used all over the country, but they were particularly successful in LA County. All right, now, by 1946, this man, Loren Miller, a prominent lawyer, had become the NAACP point person on the legality of these restricted housing deeds or restrictive covenants, as they're called. He boasted that California led the nation in the use of these restrictive covenants. And as I said, he became the expert in the national NAACP about this restricted housing or segregated housing. So if you were in Baltimore, or you were in Texas, and you had a question, you're a lawyer, an NAACP lawyer fighting a local case, and you had a question about how to work that case, you call Loren Miller. And he defended some of the most high-profile cases in the nation, including Hattie McDaniel's case in LA. Hattie McDaniel, who won an Oscar for her role in Gone with the Wind. He won that case in December 1945. And that's the same month that a man named O'Day Short moved his family to Fontana, California. And that's who I'm going to talk about now. Here he is on the left, and his wife Helen and his 2 children on the right. Sorry, these are the only pictures I could find of them from the black newspaper, the LA Sentinel. Now, O'Day Short was a refrigeration engineer for Kaiser. He had a really good job, right? For African Americans, most of them working at Kaiser or in industrial jobs, even during World War II, work the jobs that are lower on the ladder, right? But an engineer is a really good job. And he had been frustrated by the housing restrictions in LA. That was one part of the move. And the other part is that Kaiser's opening up a plant in Fontana. So in that year, 1945, he gets a lucky break and he gets a job at the Kaiser Steel plant in Fontana. And here's a picture of it. Now, Fontana, if I don't know, some of you, I know Mrs. Stokes knows where it is. It's east of the city of Pasadena, right? Heading out towards Riverside. And it was promoting itself as a place that was free of racial restrictions, even free of Jim Crow. But the Shorts would find that to be a myth. Now, the steel plant was the first West Coast facility, to turn ore into steel products on site. its opening turned Fontana into an international benchmark of advanced steelmaking. And the jobs at Kaiser were a boon for African Americans. As an engineer, Short made better wages than most Black workers who labored in the coke ovens and the blast furnaces. Now, he began building his house on 5 acres of land in Fontana when he moves out there, right? The property was south of Baseline Street, which was an area where no Black family had ever lived. And as soon as they moved into their house, the Shorts were visited by 2 white sheriffs who told O'Day Short that he was out of bounds. He should leave the neighborhood, the white-only neighborhood, and move to the Black neighborhood. On December 3rd, the real estate agent who sold the lot to the Shorts told O'Day Short, quote, "The vigilante committee had a meeting on your case last night. They're a tough bunch to deal with. If I were you, I'd get my family off this property at once," end quote. Now, O'Day Short did 3 things. First, he called an attorney, Ivan Johnson, who was the law partner of Lauren Miller. Second, he contacted the FBI. And third, he contacted members of the Black press because he recognized this for what it was, right? A threat to his livelihood and the livelihood and the life of his family by Klan members. On December 6th, the Sentinel ran banner headlines on Short's case and recounted the threat he'd received. 10 days later, the Shorts' house burst into flames. The fire that engulfed the property began with an explosion, and neighbors rushed to the scene. The family managed to escape the house, but not before all being severely burned. Some neighbors drove them to the hospital. The little girl, Carol Ann, died 15 minutes after she was admitted. The little boy died the next mother, as did Helen. And as soon as they told O'Day Short that his family had died, which the hospital staff was not telling him, was trying not to tell him, but about a week after, they told, I want to say, that the San Bernardino district attorney told him, and he died. Now, oopsie, there we go. As soon as the fire subsided, there were conflicting reports about its cause. White neighbors all said that the responsibility for the fire lay with the Shorts. According to this theory, Mr. Short was lighting a lantern or a lamp or something, and it must have exploded. And that's why the flames happened, and that's why they died.
I just saw the mail.
They're on
Now,
the,
the California Eagle,
right there on the thing.
there we go. There's an office of the California Eagle. They suspected foul play from the beginning, and they began investigating the case, as did the local Negro Chamber of Commerce. That's the San Bernardino County Negro Chamber of Commerce. A lantern or a lamp that exploded would not knock out the walls of a house, of a new house, they reasoned. In fact, they hired a fire investigator who worked for the city to look at the evidence, to actually look at the lantern. And he testified in front of the coroner's case that it wouldn't have been possible for the Shorts to start this fire from a lantern. In the aftermath of the murder, as the Eagle reported, there was an elaborate cover-up involving, among others, the San Bernardino district attorney, who's the one who visited O'Day Short in the hospital and said, you know, you basically are the one who started the fire. But the Eagle and other Black newspapers and California civil rights organizations refused to allow the fact that the Klan had threatened Short to disappear from the headlines. This is a pamphlet that was published by Helen Short's sister, who she wrote the foreword. And you can see it's published by the Socialist Workers' Party. The movement to seek justice for the Shorts was broad. Its members included not only the NAACP, but the labor movement, the Socialist Workers' Party, and others. Myra Tanner Weiss, who is the leader of the LA branch of the Socialist Workers' Party, is the one who wrote this. And again, she got Short's sister-in-law, O'Day Short's sister-in-law, to write the preface. In addition to publishing pamphlets, writing newspaper stories, keeping the story of this murder in the news, this wide coalition of Californians also put pressure on the state attorney general, Robert Kenney. Now, Kenney was no friend of the Klan, and he began investigating the Klan and the murder, and he promised an independent investigation of the murder, but nothing came of it. The Black press was despondent, as were all of the folks who were working for justice for the Shorts. An editorial in the Black newspaper, The Liberator, summed it up like this, quote, "What any person can know with entire certainty is that the Shorts were the victim of Jim Crow. Jim Crow had kept the Shorts from finding a home in Los Angeles. Jim Crow had cast him in the role of a violator of community traditions if he built a house on the lot he purchased. Jim Crow had warped the sense of duty of deputy sheriffs to the extent that they themselves had joined in a plan to deprive an American citizen of his constitutional rights. All the Shorts are dead. Only Jim Crow is alive." End quote. Now, in 1946, you can see this is the Attorney General, Robert Kenney, there on the left with a man in a Klan costume. In 1946, the year after he died, or right, they died in December of 45. So in 46, the Klan steps up their efforts to terrorize Black homeowners. Again, there were very few repercussions of this murder. They burn crosses in front of the homes of African Americans. They burn a cross in front of the Jewish fraternity at USC. USC, this fraternity, had been supporting an end to restricted housing and segregated housing. And in spring of that year, Kenney began another investigation. This time, he calls Klan members into his office. Again, the results were disheartening. They find no evidence of vigilante activity directed at the African American community in Fontana or Mr. Short personally. Some were wondering if Kenney's tepid response to this Klan activity and the murder of the Shorts was linked to his bid for governor that year, which he lost to Earl Warren. What Kenney did do, with the help of an LA Superior Court judge, is to revoke the charter of the Klan, thereby making it unlawful for the organization to hold meetings in the state. As Charlotta Bass, who had her own confrontations with the Klan, knew, this was largely symbolic. By the 1950s, activities of the Klan had resumed. And I should say that these will continue throughout the 50s, especially after the passing of Brown v. Board in 1954, which makes segregation technically illegal. Here's a picture from the LA Herald, and you can see that the caption read, "Reporter examines letters KKK," and a cross inscribed with shoe polish on the sidewalk in front of an apartment. The home of a Negro school teacher in the vicinity was recently bombed. So this is in the 50s, in 1952. It was also targeting vets, the Klan. They bombed the home of African-American vet William Bailey, who lived in South Central LA that year. And the Eagle noted, quote, "The Klan-minded apparently harbor no fears of our police department." So I just wanted to read a little bit from my chapter now before I close and I can answer questions. The threat that segregationists saw in men like O'Day Short was many-layered. They were educated men with good jobs. They could purchase property, they could vote, they could inhabit public spaces and institutions. The challenge that Lauren Miller, Charlotta Bass, the California Eagle, and the Los Angeles Sentinel mounted against housing discrimination and the Klan was formidable. But Bass and Miller never acted alone. Joined by the NAACP, the CIO, the Socialist Party, the Communist Party, and other activists, California's movement against restricted housing and the Klan ran broad and deep. Individuals across the state, few of them remembered, risked everything to cross the color line and move into neighborhoods that were known to be watched by the Klan. O'Day Short and his family sounded the alarm against the Klan. But the white supremacist violence of the 1940s found new expression in Fontana after the Brown v. Board decision. The backlash against school desegregation and the concomitant revival of the Klan became so successful that by 1965, President Lyndon Johnson ordered an investigation into Fontana's Klan activities. 2 years earlier, in 1963, an African-American captain in the US Air Force bought a house in San Bernardino, only to watch it destroyed by arsonists before he and his family could move in. Little had changed in the 17 years since the murder of the Shorts. The Golden State had long punished African Americans who dared to challenge segregation. Some paid with their lives. Okay, I am going to stop there, and I am so happy to answer your questions about this history or anything else you want to ask me.
That's your student, isn't it?
Mhm.
Wow.
How did you decide to get into to start writing all this?
Thank you, my favorite teacher. So let me just say, I love having an opportunity to talk about the inspiration I received from teachers like Alma Stokes in the Pasadena Public School District. Because I went to McKinley Junior High School and then John Muir High School and first Cleveland Elementary, I had Black teachers. And if it had not been for the Jackson case and the activism of Black Pasadenans and their colleagues and comrades, I would not have learned very much about Black history, I suspect. I would not have learned about racial justice and the lack of it in California. But because I had teachers like Alma Stokes, I was exposed to the kind of history that I wanted to learn about and that everyone should learn about. But if I hadn't been exposed to those stories, then I don't think I would have developed a curiosity about it. Now, I hope I would have developed that in college. And I went to UC Santa Cruz, where I was also extremely lucky to have teachers like Bettina Aptheker, who's the daughter of Herbert Aptheker, who's one of the most important scholars of slavery ever. So I had developed this curiosity that I then took to college. And I was in a class called California History, taught by a wonderful scholar named Pedro Castillo, who also exposed me to the way that Jim Crow worked, the ways that it was multiracial in the West Coast. And that's, again, another place where I started to have questions. And I thought, well, gee, how come we don't know more about African-American history in the West? Now, then I had a sidetrack and I went to the South, to North Carolina, where I studied Southern history and African-American history in the South. But I continued to be curious about California. And I suppose part of it is that I also realized how kind of lucky I was to be exposed to those stories. And I wanted to kind of learn more about them. Because when I went away to graduate school and we learned African-American history, nothing was ever discussed about anything that was west of the Mississippi River. As far as my textbooks and my college reading and my grad school reading was concerned, there were no African Americans who didn't live in the South or maybe Chicago, New York. So that also inspired me after, endless years of schools to go back to these stories about California and see what I could find out and start going to archives. And I went to Bancroft Library and LA Public Library and all up and down the state looking for these histories. So I'd say my answer in a nutshell, Mrs. Stokes, is you.
Yeah. And living in Pasadena, you experienced a lot of things.
Yes.
That's why you wrote about the plunge,
Right.
which you didn't mention.
Yeah. I didn't talk about it because I thought everybody knew. So when I was talking to Dick, I said, well, maybe I'll do this other story.
Which was very good.
But you're right. The plunge is the last chapter in the book. And I never would have known about writing about the Brookside Plunge if it hadn't been for people like you and my parents who told me that it had been segregated. Yeah.
And see, your experiences, you lived up in the hills.
Right.
You would have never, if you hadn't had that opportunity to experience integration,
Never.
This would have passed you right on by and you would not have known. And you would wonder why people are so upset.
Yep.
Because you didn't have any reason to.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
why did you write your other book?
Oh, I learned about Mary Ellen Pleasant in that class in college in California history. It was the only Black history. Oh, that's not true. We studied Black history in San Francisco. And when I read that article in Ebony magazine about Mary Ellen Pleasant, the worker of the Underground Railroad and the San Francisco abolitionist, I thought, oh my God, I went to California public school my whole life and I never heard of her. How come? So I forgot about it for a while, or I put it to the side, went to grad school, and then I told my advisor that I wanted to write my dissertation on her. And she said, well, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. No one's heard of her. She probably doesn't have very many papers, right? That she hasn't left letters and diaries and right. And it's a bad idea to write a biography as a dissertation. And then I did it anyway. So that's how that happened. Yeah. What else? Anybody else have any questions?
A little bit of how rich she was and how she was able to fool people.
Yes. Well, that book started my interest in trying to make the history of African Americans more complex, right? Try to tell stories that aren't the ones that everybody knows. So when you think about Black women who are abolitionists, we have Harriet Tubman, right? The heroic leader of the Underground Railroad who goes back into the South and hides in the swamps and works for the Union Army, and she's a spy and she's a nurse. But Pleasant isn't like that. She is in San Francisco She's very rich. She's listening to white people's secrets. She's an investor. She invests in silver, gold. She's an entrepreneur. She starts boarding houses, right? And she's, a speculator, buying things, selling them. She's also mixed up in this white family's business. And she doesn't really fit the mold of the heroic, self-sacrificing Black female heroine. And I was interested in that because I think it's important to show all of the layers of African American history, and also to show that the Underground Railroad operated in the West. Sometimes there's an assumption that Black people in the West were there, especially in the 19th century, because they were greedy and they went to the gold rush and they were really more interested in money than they were in freedom. So I was trying to show that you could do both. And she's a perfect way to show that and complicate our idea of abolitionists. Now I saw a hand. Phyllis, you have a question?
There are three
Yes, hi.
hands, Cheryl,
Three hands.
Phyllis, and Will.
UK. You guys go.
Okay. Should I continue?
Sure.
Thanks. Thank you for your excellent work. I was a little bit late, and I just want to know where you did your undergraduate work and your doctoral studies. I've worked on my doctorate since 2012, and I've encountered quite a few interesting hurdles, if you want to call it. So I'm glad to hear yours as well. But those are the first two questions. And then second, are you related to the Hudson family that's made quite a few strides here in Los Angeles? I think they owned a bank or some other financial activities. So I guess
No,
that's three questions. No,
Thank you.
okay.
First, easy. No, my people are Southern sharecroppers. Yeah.
Okay.
No. That's where the Hudson part comes from, and the other part is Italian. So no.
Oh, what town in where did they do
My
the
dad was
sharecropping?
from
I'm sorry.
North Carolina, near
North Carolina.
Hickory.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I went to Santa Cruz, UC Santa
Okay.
Cruz. Yep. And I was very lucky to be there in the 80s, and I had amazing professors. I did women's studies and history. Then I went to University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, and for my master's. And then I went to Indiana University for my PhD. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there were a lot of hurdles, so many hurdles, that I don't even have time. It's not enough days for me to talk about.
Yeah,
But
that's another conversation.
that's another
Did you
conversation.
publish? Did you publish your dissertation,
Yes,
or
yes,
is
I
it
did.
available?
Yep.
You
Yep.
did.
Yep. You can buy it. Indiana University. Illinois. University of Illinois Press, The Making of Mammy Pleasant, a Black entrepreneur in 19th-century San Francisco. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Sure. Who's next? Somebody, Will, had a question? Or,
Cheryl came first. Why don't we let Cheryl go and then I'll go?
okay.
And Toby wants to talk.
Yeah, I don't know
Cheryl?
how to
Cheryl,
I don't know how to put the thing up, so I'm putting my real hand up.
Good.
okay, Toby.
Oh, okay. Well, first, I really want to thank you. And I want to thank you in a personal way. And I want to thank you for a few things. And one is mentioning the coalition and mentioning that while the bulk of it was people of color, there are also questionable people like me who are deemed people of color sometimes in history and not in other times. As an Ashkenazi Jew who is has a tremendous amount of white privilege. 1949, I was 6. My family moved into a tract in Monterey Park, so only a few miles from here.
Mhm.
I believe there's pieces of this I don't know and I don't remember. I believe that at least part of the owners or investors or corporation that made this tract was Kaiser.
Mm.
Um, it was, I found out later, a restricted tract. I don't know exactly, well, I do know partially how we got there. And I think I'm going to even out myself more here, is that my family's communist socialist family and part of the coalition. And we have an anglicized last name. Coleman can go many ways.
Mm.
And so we moved in. It was all white people, no Jews. And in the 1950s, no communist socialist people who were deemed the enemy of the state. So I have a lot of anti-Semitic and other experiences there. And I just wanted to throw that into the mix because it is part of the mix and it's a big part of the story and it's part of what formed me and got me to be knowing Bettina Aptheker and other people.
Oh, nice.
So
That's so great.
and I have been very hesitant in talking about this, not wanting to upstage or,
Mhm.
and so when you talk about Jim Crow, but you also include, I'm grateful.
Thank you so much. That's really important and it's really touching to me. I've been teaching for 30 years and in the classroom, I try to tell these stories because I think when we silo out the stories and we don't talk about the abolitionist movement being multiracial or the fight against the Klan being multiracial and also about feminism, we don't imagine the ways that citizens in this country have always worked in coalitions. So it's really important. Thanks. Yes.
Cheryl, do you want to speak? Your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to ask you if you have thought about how much of the progress that we've made in inclusion and fair treatment for different sorts of people, including women, of course, is going to be lost due to the incoming administration's appointments to cabinet heads. It seems to me that, the dog and pony show has now become a full circus, and I am frankly terrified.
Yeah. When I agreed to do this today, it was the last thing on my mind. It was the last thing on my mind. It's been a really hard time. I'm trying to regroup, as we all are, and think about what we can do. And I'm not a scholar of contemporary politics. I live in the 1850 to 1950. That's where I live. So I'm not really qualified to talk about contemporary things, but I will say this. When Trump got elected the first time, I was teaching. This year, I'm on fellowship and I'm not teaching. But I walked in that day after he was elected and I was teaching women's history, US women's history. And I had been so sure that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected that I had assigned a set of her speeches to talk about that day. Well, that was not happening. And I walked in and I teach at a public university, University of Illinois at Chicago. It's the only public university, research public university in the city. We have the most immigrant students. We have the most Palestinian students, the most Arab students, the most DACA students, the most Dreamers of any place in the Midwest, the most working class students. And I walked in that day and everybody was crying. And I thought, and I was crying. And I thought, I don't know what to say. How am I going to get through this day? And what I did was I said, I know a lot of us are worried. I want to turn it over to you, but I want to give you a space to share your concerns. And one of the women said, listen, we're reading a book about Fannie Lou Hamer. We've been learning about the people being attacked on the March in Selma, on the students who were brutalized and sent to the hospital because they were in the freedom rides. We can look to those folks to get through now. We have to summon up our courage and be John Lewis, be Fannie Lou Hamer, and bring to the situation now the belief, the hope, and the energy that they brought every day. Now, truth be told, I'm not there, not right now, not today. I am still in the mourning and grieving. Some of you might have seen the writing by Rebecca Solnit that's been going around. It's a piece about it's okay to mourn right now, that to take a minute, think about what we're going to do next. But because we are going to do something next, you know? And of course we are, but it's also okay to not be okay for a minute, because it's that serious, it's that grave, it's that dangerous. But I've been following Indivisible. Some of you might know about that group. And one of the things in their email today said, don't forget, we had some victories downstate on the ballot. We got abortion rights in Nebraska. We flipped the supermajority in the North Carolina legislature. And a lot of what is affecting folks' lives has to do with your state politics right now. And let me just say, where you are and where I am are safer places to be. So I think it's also important to sort of be relative here and realize that there's some folks who are moms of trans kids in a red state who have a very different reality right now. And I speak from a place of pretty safe, safety. I've got Governor J.B. Pritzker, who said, you think you're going to take away reproductive rights in Illinois? You come through me, right? We're sending out folks all around the country. We're flying people into Illinois to get abortions because we are surrounded by red state. And I want to put my energy when I get back, and we will all be back to work. I'm going to put my energy there. But everybody has different strengths and different ways to help, right? And it's okay if you just need to turn off the radio for a minute and eat some sugar. That's what I'm doing right now. That's my mode. I'll be back. Questions?
Okay. Cheryl and Will, one last time. You both have your hands up. I tried.
I've lost them.
I'm waiting for Cheryl to talk. If Cheryl isn't
Well,
going to talk,
Cheryl doesn't seem to want to. We've
okay. Well,
invited and
let me
invited
let me
her.
let me kid on a couple. First of all, let me turn my camera on because it's relevant to what we're talking about. I want you to see my very white face. I'm a person of privilege in all sorts of respects. I'm also a registered Republican, but don't hold that against me for the moment. And I was a white Southerner whose father in the 60s, a lawyer, was on the Durham School Board, my hometown, arguing for segregation against the one black school board member in Durham. So I have a background that's rather interesting. In that context, I am absolutely dedicated to the rights of all people in this nation. I think that's one of the definitions of Americanism, and I get bothered by people who use that sort of term to basically distort what's really happening. That said, this is a moment for people to gather around and, I think, do what we're doing here. Support each other, work on activities, not give up the hope, because we exist all over the country. My hometown of Durham is a very different place from where I grew up, for example. It's a center of all sorts of activity. Now, I live in Oregon. I live in Portland, Oregon. Oregon didn't have many black folks. The Klan had to go after the Catholics because we had laws prohibiting blacks from living in the state. Now we have moved to the left in our city and state administration, and as a safe place for people, it's about as safe as you get, but that's still doesn't mean there are a lot of people who are, unfortunately, Trump supporters of the sort who don't believe in this kind of activity. Let's put it where it is. There's a political, I think there's a political leaning, and I wish that wasn't the case. Our historical society, for example, Oregon is led by a Republican, and they have a broad base of history about all the groups and ethnic groups in Oregon. You can bridge those gaps, but we have to work on it. I'm not mourning, actually. I'm energized, if you will.
Great. Good to hear. We're going to need that.
Along those lines, Harv, I have a couple of questions for you. You said you went to Santa Cruz in the 80s for undergraduate. Were you at Oaks College by any chance?
No, I was at Kresge.
Okay, because a friend of mine, an old-time friend, Herman Blake, used to be the chancellor of Oaks College.
I knew Herman Blake. I went to school with his daughter. He was great.
Oh, he's a fabulous guy. I was
Yeah.
with him when he was in Berkeley. He was a grad student, and I was an undergrad. Anyway.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so there's a whole lot of, and that what your theme is a wonderful talk about the Klan. The Klan may not be around, but as far as I can tell, ever since Nixon's Southern strategy, there has been a stream in mainstream politics, which is something we as mainstream people can deal with. I was disappointed that the Democratic and Republican parties didn't show up in any of the histories you were talking about. The Socialist Workers' Party, as you would know, a radical Trotskyist revolutionary does not have a lot of clout in the country, and so on. But those with clout, I think, are the ones that we need to appeal to stand up, and those with clout who care are around and need to be supported, as well as the people who don't have the clout, who are the victims. So kudos for your work, and for bringing the fact that all this stuff happens right in our own hometowns. And one final thing, I'll get to go. The move to fight critical race theory and not teach sorts of history and so on is one of the major issues that isn't on the radar at the moment that I think needs to be dealt with. To bring back true history to the curriculum in schools so kids don't have to hunt out, like you had to hunt out, what's going on in the system. So if anything I'd say to work on right now is keep social studies in schools in a way that makes a difference to kids who can hear the full story, not the sanitized story. So thank you again.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah. Okay. How long do you all go?
Till 1:30.
Oh, okay.
Half hour.
Okay, good. All right, so who's next?
Yeah.
I don't see a name,
Village
but
14.
it says Village 14. Go ahead. Go ahead, Village 14.
I'm Linda.
Hi, Linda.
My Village 14 is my handle for
Nice.
a Bible study that we had last night. I thank you so much, Lynn, for your tenacity and your scholarship. And I just want to chime in and say that there are many of us here in America, I agree with you, who are in mourning. And those stages are shock and denial, which we're in right now, bargaining, anger, depression, and ultimately maybe acceptance. And we're going to move back and forth between different stages. I remember when my dad was diagnosed with colon cancer, and one thing his doctor said to him, because we were mourning the fact that he was ill, do not make any major decisions during the first several stages. So I think that it's going to be wise for us to learn, to listen, and as Will said, to share informs with one another, especially as we are not all alike. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those are good words. Who's next? Alicia, I see your hand.
Yes, hi. Can you
Hi.
guys hear me?
Yeah.
Actually, Alicia's my daughter. She
Okay.
fixed it with her name there. My name's Melba.
Hi, Melba.
I would like to know if you think, what part you think racism had to play in this last election. And I'm struck by when it's discussed, when I see it discussed on television, even in the very liberal shows, they never mention it. They'll say the economy, people want to change, but they don't bring up racism. And then sometimes I've heard people say, well, Obama won, he's Black, but Obama caught him off guard, and now there's a big old backlash. And I think sexism is part of it too. But I find it so interesting that it is not discussed in the media. I would like to know what you think about it.
Okay. Yes, that's true. That's true. And again, disclaimer, Lynn Hudson does not study elections, anything past 1950. So this is just off the cuff, okay? Not my area of expertise. But yes, of course, sexism played a role. Absolutely. And I think it is interesting that probably the campaign decided it was wise to bury the gender. Don't talk about Kamala Harris being the first Black woman. That's just going to push away some of those undecideds and Republicans that we want to win over to our side, right? So I think you're absolutely right. And yes, of course, this is all about racism. Everything about the election is about it. The fact that we, and by we, I want to go back to the we part of this. Only 22% of Americans elected him. Most people didn't. 22%. Hold on to that number. It's not most Americans. It's not even close to the majority of Americans. That's who elected him. A lot of Americans didn't vote at all, right? So we got to be careful. You know, I have a colleague, the chair of my department, whose son is queer and crying and saying most of Americans hate me. Wait, 22%, right? So we got to be clear about that. But back to your question about what does this have to do with racism? Part of what I'm doing today is talking about the victories of white supremacy, the success of the Klan, the fact that there was no accountability because those Klan members murdered Black folks all over California and nobody got busted. Nobody was arrested, right? So now we've elected someone who praised the Klan in Charlottesville, who is quite open about his praise of folks who identify as white supremacists. They might not use that word, but they're putting people in cages who are immigrants, even though they are the children and the grandchildren of immigrants, unless they're African American or Native American. All these white folks are related to immigrants. So part of what I do as a historian, what I'm trying to do with this work and why I wrote this book is I think it's important for us to see that this is not new. The success of white supremacy, it's not new. The racism that infiltrates every part of the United States, even places like San Francisco or LA that are supposed to be progressive. One of the reasons I study California is it's my hope that by studying the pervasiveness of white supremacy and the successes it had, I mean, Robert Kennedy was a very popular DA, right? And he didn't have any success, didn't even have the gumption to successfully prosecute the Klan, that if we study these moments, it will help us be ready. I mean, it's okay to be surprised that 22% of Americans voted for a felon, a rapist, a convicted felon who praises white supremacists. It's important to face that fact, face it. But it's not new. And so that's why I became a historian and why I am one and why I wrote this book. Why is it important to acknowledge that it's not new? Because I think that the surprise isn't going to help us, right?
Yeah.
As Linda said, right, you've all been saying, we all process things in our different ways, right? We're all going to face this in different ways and do different work. But being surprised means you haven't done your history, right? And look what these folks did to fight it, right? So also, we don't want to erase the work that did get done. And I have folks who worked their butts off in North Carolina. They worked so hard door knocking. These are a friend of mine who's a precinct captain in the Democratic Party, and they won important victories in that state. So we got to be careful about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, I guess is what I'm saying. And I think you're asking a really important question about identifying racism and all of the insidious ways that it works. That's important. Yeah, you're absolutely. It's sexism. It's everywhere. Yeah.
I think what's being forgotten in the country generally is just how much support Kamala did have.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah, we shouldn't wipe that out. We shouldn't erase that. Yeah. The ways that women and men mobilized for abortion rights and reproductive health care, it's amazing. And we're not going to lose that. Those coalitions, those networks. Yeah, that's important. All right.
Yeah, I don't think she's getting credit for that.
No, she's not. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I see someone named Marco with a hand up.
Good morning, all. I am happy to meet a fellow John Muir graduate.
Yay!
I appreciate you using the Klan and the presence of the Klan to illustrate the significance and the depth and the impact of racism in Southern California. At the same time, could you speak to the fact that institutions like the Valley Hunt Club, the Tournament of Roses, Westwood School for Girls, All Saints Episcopal Church, all of these institutions, based on the exclusionary practices of racism, pre-existed the presence of the Klan in Southern California, that racism brought the Klan to Southern California. The Klan did not bring racism to Southern California. Could you speak to that, please? As a good John Muir graduate.
That is an excellent question. So, yeah, one of the things I wanted to do is to not tell the story as if, as you said, that racism, here, California is all good, Pasadena is all good, and then it was brought in from the outside. And that is the danger of telling the story this way, right? But if you read my book, I sort of set it up from the beginning, and I start with statehood in 1850, and I write about all the ways that segregation and racism is codified into the first Constitution, into the anti-testimony law, and I talk about the ways that it's basically homegrown, right? That it's not brought from the outside. Now, Pasadena is only one chapter in my book. And I focus on the plunge. So the publishers were always after me to edit out stuff and shorten it. And they said the Pasadena chapter was too long because I had this thing about the Valley Hunt Club, which got knocked out. But I do try to point out that, Henry Huntington was very busy setting up all-white neighborhoods. And the Valley Hunt Club was starting their show parade and white-only membership. Yeah, and I think that's really, really important. I ended up focusing on the pool, partly because it does show how homegrown racism was and is in Pasadena. And I was able to show that it's not only the pool and the city council that's making it white only, but it also is members of the Star News and members of an organization called the Human Betterment Foundation, which is a eugenics organization that had its office on Colorado Boulevard. And it started in the 1920s. And this is really important because eugenics, right, this idea that only fit white people should reproduce. So again, it's thought to be something that exists in the United States, but people often think of it as maybe being practiced more in labs or places outside of California. But in fact, California was a hotbed of eugenicism and eugenicist thought, and Pasadena had one of the most important organizations. It's also something that was being spouted by people at Stanford, people at Caltech.
Margaret Sanger.
And Margaret Sanger. Yeah. So I was able to use the pool to sort of show that it's not, again, brought from the outside, as you said, Marco. This is something that members of the elite worked on and believed in many different ways, right? They started the Pasadena Homeowners Association, which worked very hard to keep neighborhoods white only. And it happened in all kinds of ways. So thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, it has a long history in every city, but I tried to talk about how it make the pool the centerpiece and talk about why that was so concerning to segregationists and eugenicists that as early as 1914, they made the policy that Black people could only swim 1 day a week. As many of you know, that was called Negro Day, and then they changed the name to International Day because Mexican Americans and Asian Americans could also only swim on that day. I've been doing some research lately on other pools because Brookside made me think, wow, that's so early. That's pioneering to develop that kind of segregation, that system of segregation so early. It's not what we think. We don't think that would happen in Pasadena, that they'd be in the forefront of this. We didn't think that it would be so early. So I've been looking around and I've been studying a pool in St. Louis that opened the year before. And they just had a vague policy, which was sort of turn Black people away. They didn't have a so-called Negro Day. They just weren't letting Black people swim. And then in 1949, a new parks director said, well, we can't legitimately, legally turn Black citizens away. They're taxpayers. And when they changed the policy, there was a full-scale riot. Thousands of white people attacked Black people in this park in St. Louis. It was the worst pool riot, if you will, in US history. And I've been studying that. But I still think Brookside might be the second in terms of opening a segregated pool. So that's part of my story there. That was a tangent.
Well, I went to the Pasadena Museum one time, and if I remember correctly, I had the impression that it sort of exalts the Black people's participation in the settling of Pasadena and its growth. But maybe I just didn't remember correctly.
Yeah. I mean, the Pasadena Museum has some great research, partly because when he was a graduate student, Robin Kelly, who's one of the most important scholars of African American history in the country, He did research on Black Pasadena, and he left all his notes and all his research in that museum, in their archive. So they have some good records on early Black Pasadena. They don't focus on Brookside or anything in particular, but they have great records about early Black Pasadena. They also have a set of oral history that they did. Some of them are on video too. They did these for an exhibition about Black Pasadena. I think it was in the 90s, maybe. The first Black Rose Queen. They decided, when there was first Black Rose Queen, they decided they would do oral histories with Black Pasadenians. So there's those two. So there's plenty there on the history of Black Pasadena. Yep. Who's next?
This is Will again, if I can. I don't see any other hands up. One thought I'm trying to work on is what is a larger worldview that allows racism to flourish? And I'm thinking, for me, when I talk about the US thing, I use the term Eurocentrism rather than racism. That European attitudes, European ethnic groups, European religions, and so on are broader. And I know the places you mentioned, Valley Hunt Club and so on, these are places for elite, however you define elite. We're better than other folks. What do you see broader themes that allow racism to flourish in terms of how you view your fellow human beings?
I mean, yeah. Those certainly elitism, classism, it all plays a part. But rich Black people couldn't be in the Valley Hunt Club. So
No.
it would be erroneous to try to silo that and say that it's just because of class. And,
No.
one of the things that's so important about critical race theory and why we're all fighting so hard to keep that in universities is that it's just the study of how all of these things work together, right? So that somebody isn't just Italian, they're also a woman and they're also poor, right?
Yeah.
So what we call intersectionality, right? So it's so important that we do have a more complicated way of studying race, and the way to do that is to get students to read and to read history and to read about race. It's, the sort of attack on this is so simplistic and so even just ridiculous. Yeah. I'm worried about people that I was just at a conference and talking about African American history, and I had a Texas school teacher in the audience, and she was saying, hey, we're not allowed to anymore to talk about Black history or say that, let's say, slavery was bad. We can't say that. So what we are allowed to do is to show documents and then just have the students look at them. So this was a meeting of the Southern Historical Association that I was just at, professors who teach Southern history. So what she was doing is she was asking the audience to send her documents so she could work around that law. And I can't tell you how many times this happened at this conference, that the professors would get up, and a few school teachers were there too, high school teachers, and they talked about being in these states that have passed these laws and how they're going to teach just basic American history, just the basics. They can't do this anymore. So it's really going to be important for us to think about how to help people like me in a position who can, to help out folks, teachers, grade school teachers, all the way to professors in college, how to do this. How are we going to get around these bans? I mean, don't even get me started on the book bans. It's just crazy. So yeah, it's going to be important. We're going to need all our skills. And I would, anybody that's trying to do this, try to reach out to teachers that and help them. I mean, don't need to help the Pasadena teachers. I mean, they might need all kinds of help for different reasons, but there's folks in Texas and Florida who are really going to face some challenges. So I'm trying to hold them in my thoughts and maybe see if we can reach out if you know people that need help, schools that need books, you know, kids that need books. Anyway,
Well,
that's
there,
a tangent too.
I don't know if I can broaden on that. Again, my immediate experience is Oregon. I did live in Pasadena some years ago, but in Oregon, local school boards have authority, and in some areas, especially the more rural areas, the school board will make that kind of a censorship decision rather than the state. And that means you don't have to go to Mississippi to find racism. You go look out to your local area.
That's right. That's a good advice for everybody. Start where you live, and school boards. It's essential now that people get involved in their school boards and try to protect books, reading, history.
Oh, but before I forget it, I want to compliment Marco and his comment that racism didn't come to California. California brought racism to the Klan. I think that's a beautiful illustration of the real situation.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. When I turned in the manuscript from this book, you know, when you were trying to publish a scholarly book, you get what's called outside readers, and they're anonymous, right? They send it to somebody who studies California, somebody who, you know, whoever, you don't know who they are. And one of the readers said, yeah, California has racism. Everybody knows that. Hudson keeps saying that, you know, we need to learn more about it, but everybody knows that. My editor said, I don't think everybody knows that, you know. I think there's room for one more book about that. So it's funny when I go to give public talks, I get all kinds of reactions, and some people, when I was giving a talk in Minnesota, a Californian in the audience said, "You're being way too hard on California. You know, all kinds of Black folks went there from the South during the Great Migration, and they found freedom." This is a history professor who's telling me this, by the way. They found freedom, and they got to live in a house, and they didn't have to be sharecroppers. And I said, look, I'm not saying that every Black person in California, you know, lived a better life than every Black person in Mississippi. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that these migrants experienced racism in California in different ways. And here are some of the ways that California perfected the use of restrictive covenants, that the national expert lived in LA and said that LA was the worst place in the country for segregated housing. I'm not saying it's the worse than Mississippi, but she was so testy. And I have this sometimes when I go around the country and I give this talk or different versions of talks from my book, is that it's still true. I think it's transplanted Californians. That was her problem. She was having a sort of nostalgic feeling about the place she wished she still lived instead of below 30 degrees Minnesota. And so she was really critical of this. And I can't tell you how many times this has happened. So people get testy. They get testy about this. Never had that in Pasadena, though. I rarely had that in California. It's when I'm outside. Yeah. All right. Who hasn't?
I think that's an example, Lynn, of what the book White Fragility was talking about is, you know, there's a resistance to hearing the truth. And the lieutenant governor of Texas, some months ago, maybe a year or so ago, when they were having a dispute over things that were being taught about the Alamo, made the statement, we don't want our children taught those kinds of things. We want them taught the traditional history. So there's a very clear statement of what they're doing in Texas, and they're doing it all over the place. And it's all very scary.
It really is.
Uh,
Yeah.
One of the things that you had mentioned early on was how you got started in writing your book, and you mentioned that an incident, I think you were talking that you learned something in Alma's classes, but it was a little story that planted a seed that set you off in the direction of writing your book. And it strikes me that hearing stories about these kinds of things is the way to get people interested and to let them know the stories that some people say, well, everybody knows that, and clearly everybody doesn't. I think you could, I don't think there's any story you could come up with about anything like this that everybody knows, because it's been suppressed so vigorously. But what we do here is we talk about it and we try to get the word out. And the thing that concerns me is we're talking to the choir, and the people who need to hear it, who need to be thinking about things differently, don't hear it. And I'm wondering, how do we, and I don't have the answer, obviously, but the only thing I can say we do is just keep going and doing what we're doing and hope that some of it filters out and that it has an impact overall in it. Maybe we can cause a change, help bring about a change that way. So anyway, we're gonna try to keep it going here at the
Good.
1619. One other thing that we didn't really talk about is racism is pretty much around the world. It's everywhere, but there's something different about it in the U.S. and it manifests itself in different ways. And I think that one of the premises of the 1619 is that experience of slavery in this country has changed the way racism manifests itself. And we don't really talk about that much. But I hear many stories about people of color traveling in various other places, and they experience racism when they go to Europe. But when they talk about it, they talk about it as a different kind of experience. And I don't think we've explored that as much as we might benefit from talking about that. So it's just one of the curious things, it seems to me, that we're still overlooking. So I don't know if are there any do you have any closing thoughts you'd like to give us, Lynn? We're running out of time here, and I do have to
Sure.
run because I got another appointment I got to
Okay.
rush to.
Well, I want to thank you all. Really appreciate connecting with you and hearing your thoughts and getting feedback on this. I commend you for these discussion groups, and it sounds like you all do great work. And a lot of times as a teacher and a scholar, you don't really know when you make a difference. And that's why I am so happy that I got to reconnect with Alma Stokes and tell her what a difference she made, because you don't know. Students go off, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students that she taught and that I've taught, thousands at Cal Poly and McAllister, here at Chicago. And I can, maybe on one hand, I can count the emails that I got saying, I learned something. So it's really great that you all are doing this work, and that the ripples of this kind of work, as you just said, Dick, they go in places we don't even know about, right? Who would have thought that 50 years ago that I would have been sitting in the back of Alma Stokes's station wagon, driving around places that I never would have gone, hearing stories that I never would have known, and that would become a career and a life that to me is everything I wanted it to be. So thank you. And let me know how your group turns out. Hopefully I'll be out there in a few years, retired, and who knows? I'll see y'all later. I'm
Well,
hoping.
thank you very much. We appreciate it. And I want to thank Alma Stokes for introducing us too.
Thank you. Yes, both of you.
Alma has made quite a difference in this community. So many people know Alma because
So
so many of their
true.
students, their children went to school and encountered Alma. So
So
she has really made a difference. So thank you very much. This is recorded. The recording will be up sometime during the next week on our YouTube channel, and it will be available, and you can tell your friends about it and ask them to go take a look at it, and they can learn some of the things that we've learned. So thank you very much, and thanks to all of you for coming, and let's keep things going and do what we can.
Thank
Never give up.
y'all.
Thank you,
Bye.
Angie.
Take care. Thank
Thank-
you, Lynn.
Okay, we'll talk soon.
Right.
All right.
Thanks, Lynn,
Bye-bye.
and thanks, Alma.
You're welcome. Take
Thanks
care.
very much to everyone, and good luck to us all.